presenter today is Dr. Vidhu Singh, dear friend of mine. And Vidhu has got multiple talents and multiple hats, but I think I'll let her introduce herself because she can do it better than I. So thank you all for being with us and welcome, Vidhu.
Thank you, Ed. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Vidhu, and I'm a theater maker and a cultural activist. I was born and raised in India, and I live in San Francisco. Originally the and still unceded territory of the Dramaturg Ohlone people, who I want to acknowledge because, especially as a first-generation immigrant on this land, I just think that's really important for me. And because of my own connection to land and ancestors and how that actually, with being uprooted, that it's just really important for me to root and locate myself and also honor the place that I'm in. And so today's session is about Ancestor Stories and sharing treasured stories to connect with our ancestors, with our ancestral roots and our cultural roots. And I actually want to start by saying that I want to expand the notion of ancestor for people, for everybody, because not everybody has biological ancestors that they know. Some people, may not have full awareness of their biological identity, but ancestor loosely defined to include anyone who has a deep and profound influence on our lives who has passed. And so with that, I'd like to start by calling in ancestors. And I have stories about lots of ancestors and even young ancestors, who have passed. But, I like to just invoke my grandmother, Banso Devi. And she was, she passed in her 90s, and I was very lucky to grow up in India in a, somewhat a joint family system, not a very traditional joint family, but my grandparents were from the village. And then as they got too old to take care of their land, they moved to the city. And actually, before they moved to the city, we would go to the village every week. And that was really fantastic because we have a connection to, our rural roots. And as people, we belong to a community of Jats from Uttar Pradesh, which is a state in northern India. And basically, it's a community of peasant warriors. And I think that that has had an impact, and it's a martial community, and it's actually one of the preferred community for battle. One of the three sort of big martial communities, and also the Jats they came from Central Asia around the 1st or 2nd AD. They were actually pastoral nomads, and then they began to live on this Indo-Gangetic plain. The great rivers, the Indus and the Ganges, seat of civilization at the time. And they were, oddly enough, not entirely defined by the caste system or even by religion, because they took on the religions of the areas they lived in. So in Pakistan, they're Muslim, and then as you move into Punjab, they were Sikh, and then into UP, Haryana, Rajasthan, they were Hindu. So that I find interesting. And also that there was always a battle between the Brahmins, the highest caste, and the Jats. Like the Jats basically never accepted being dominated. And the Brahmins try to push them to a kind of a lower on the, there's a very stratified system. So, which is hard to explain and understand. But they say they belong to this caste, but that caste believes they were lower, so anyway, so it's interesting. And But I think of my ancestors and think, even as my father, I was talking to him yesterday, and my parents are in India, in Delhi. And, and he said, you're, from what, 7 generations of farmers, and you're the first generation that can actually stand up and be equal to anyone and is privileged and really educated. And so from both sides, we have rural roots, and then we have these extraordinary entrepreneurial people who came and made it and succeeded. And then, of course, you have me and my sister, for example, who are women. Jat women happen to be very strong because they've always had to stand up to a very patriarchal, extremely sexist culture. And in one particular festival of Holi, I mean, they're even known to beat the men with sticks. It's sort of a ritual reversal of roles. So Holi is a big spring festival. And there's a village near our hometown where on that day roles are reversed. And in Holi, actually, gender is reversed, caste is reversed. There's, in the beautiful essence of Holi, overturning of roles, overturning of class, caste, religion, gender. And so the women were trained for a long time with these big bamboo sticks, these thick bamboo sticks. They're called, Nita might know, lathi, jo bolte hain. And actually they're used in sort of a folk martial art as well. And so the women, you could see them like their heads were covered and all that, but they were like practicing, like beating the crap out of these guys. And on that day, the men would run through the streets and they would have these shields made of leather, and the women would just whack him and swear at them and curse them. So anyways, that's, part of the area that I come from. And you can see all these videos, and now it's become a big tourist thing. People try to go there and watch the women whack the men, and, but it's just that, right, Nita?
If you guys want to, Nita, get my leather shield, I'll
yeah. And you see these
symbolic
big shields.
Torture.
And these shields, and these guys are ducking and holding, and these women are like hitting them hard. And these are like young brides and old ladies, and and they're really athletic. You can see they're like jumping really hard and hitting hard, using all their strength. So anyway, so that's just a little vignette of the area I belong to, which, as I said, there's nothing romantic about it. It's really rustic. And I think what's interesting is the sense of freedom of spirit and resilience and wit that Jats have. That's something that I just hold on to, right? And so I look at my grandmother, for example, who I've shared in another session, that my grandmother was, is it okay to swear again? I mean, she was a total badass bitch, my grandmother. Okay? And the other thing is that she had, my grandfather was so scared of her that even when he was in a coma, and she came into the room, and he was at one point, he was in a coma, and he was like he was sort of semi-choking, and my uncle said, "Calm down, she's not here, calm down." So,
Wow.
So she was very funny, and she kept us laughing till the end. And every day, like, we have some sort of story or anecdote or proverb, that'll remind us of her, because she was absolutely not afraid of being alone or of death, right? So here she is, my grandmother. She's really tough, and she's alienated the hell out of everyone. And we're like begging her, like, keep a few people close for convenience, and you're alone. And, and she just wouldn't, because she really wasn't afraid. And at one time, actually, my family has a somewhat global biography, because though we were born and raised, as I said, in a somewhat traditional way, very urban, but with cultural roots in the village. But then my father, who's an entrepreneur, got he set forth from India, and he was an early computer science guy. And so he found work in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, finally ending in Afghanistan before returning home. And so when he was in Jamaica, he would make these short visits back to India. And it's very far from Jamaica to India is a very long journey, as it is from the US to India. And he'd come back to see his parents, and my grandmother would just look at him and say, why bother to come? And she'd say in Hindi, she'd say, like, why do you worry? Even the trees of our era are not around anymore. Like, we should be dead. Like, why do you worry about us, right? And just along those lines, there was a neighbor who was a nosy neighbor, and she'd say to my grandmother, like, Dadi ji, which means grandmother, and she'd say, Dadi ji, you better lock up, and you're going to get killed and murdered, and you shouldn't be alone. And she said, well, we're kind of hoping someone would kill us, because I don't think we're going to die if someone doesn't kill us. So that's a sort of a poor translation, but it's as Meeta might understand or Nidhi might understand. She'd say, ki, Lali, hum to chahe ki koi hame maar dale. Lagta hai hum bin mare na marenge. Like, without being killed, we're not going to go, So that was her sense of being really unafraid and being witty, And I have all these stories of how she basically frightened men with guns, etc., etc. And all my grandparents, beautiful stories. And actually, I even think of my grandfather, her husband, Dadaji, and how in the 1937 plague in India, when people were dying in the village, nobody wanted to touch these bodies or touch the sick people. And I've forgotten the science of it, but they say, you have to really strap up your legs.
No, that was their misunderstanding, because they didn't understand. They thought that it was something climbing from the ground that would climb up. So they were tying up their feet. They were protecting their feet.
Yeah. So he had he would, wind his feet, his legs all the way up to the calves, wear these big socks and cover his face. And then he would actually pick up these bodies and cremate them when nobody wanted to touch them. And that was, her husband. So, I mean, they were just amazing. They were wonderful. The oral tradition, everything was humor, poetry, anecdote, wit, storytelling, epic storytelling, story within story, complicated verse. And these were people who were unlettered. And so, I learned that there was a particular kind of intelligence that people have that is lost through education. And I say that as somebody who's overeducated, because my grandmother, actually, I'll conclude with this story for this moment. She felt very sorry for me that I got an education. And one time there was I had some kind of an exam, and I was sort of really miserable before it, and I was almost crying. And she said, hi, what's going on? Kyun ro rahi hai? And then why? And I said, Dadi ji, I'm really afraid about this exam. And she said basically, oh my God, they got you in this lifetime. I'm so lucky. I hope they don't get me in my next lifetime, right? So, and she thought she was smarter, and she was, because she knew nature, knew land, knew animals, knew the stars, knew the seasons. She could sing better than anybody. She could dance better than anybody. I had a classically trained vocalist, quite famous folk singer, come to the house because I was always studying the arts. And she made fun of him. She just thought she could sing better than him. So I will pause. Thank you for your patience in letting me just share a few stories. What I'd like to do is just welcome you to share, actually invite an ancestor in. and share an ancestor story. And I'm particularly interested in what were the gifts that were given to you by that ancestor. So if you want to invite an ancestor, share a story, and just perhaps reflect on a gift that you have experienced through that relationship. Anyone?
Nidhi has her hand up.
Oh, cool. Okay, go for it, Nidhi.
I think we'll have to turn the audio if it's echoing. Let me turn it down a bit. Yeah, I was just remembering, the bravery of that story, and that now with COVID and all, if you think that my grandfather during the plague covered his face, that's probably what saved him, right? He had a mask on, right? And the story is that they took bodies in bullock carts to be cremated, and nobody wanted to do this job, right? So he was very brave. He did it. And then the story goes on to where a little after that, he thought he had these bumps in his armpits, and he thought he had got it. And he went out to, there's a house, and then there's the courtyard side where you often have cows or buffaloes or whatever, and a place to sit where the men have the hookah and the hangout place for the women. That's a, social space. And so he went to the ghair and he lit a fire and he heated a brick, and he basically burned off those things in his armpit with a burning brick. And then somebody saw him, and so the rumor went through the village that, Pahalwan Saab is sick. Pahalwan he was a wrestler. He was a wrestler, yeah. So he was a Pahalwan in the village. So just the bravery, and even my grandmother's attitude, like laughing at old age, laughing at the idea of death, not living in fear of dying is, I remember one time I went back to India, and she was like this, like really, these were hips and this was a head. And I used to worry about her head going to doorknobs, and she would be still making her rotis, still very self-reliant, did it all herself, and didn't trust anyone. That's another story. And then she would say, yeah, I'm starting to turn into a wood duck with my butt up in the air. Here you are, just incredible resilience and acceptance of whatever stage she was in, and fearless, Of course she had fear right at the end, or she was sad, or a combination of both, but really inspiring fearlessness, That's my share. Thank you.
Nidhi and Vidhu are sisters.
Okay.
Just yeah. I don't know who is the younger one, but it doesn't matter. They're both so beautiful.
I had a great grandfather who came they came from Scotland, and they went to Wisconsin and became farmers and failed miserably at it. Then traveled to Detroit, and my great grandfather invented the marshmallow or a step towards what we know as the marshmallow. So he made, it used to be like candy made out of marshmallow, and then he made a different kind, but it tasted like it, and became very wealthy. And then he was asked to be an investor in Ford Motor Company, and he accepted, but only if he was the person who ran the financial part of it, because Henry Ford had already gone bankrupt once. So, and then he started, and he didn't believe in it, and he started having heart trouble, And then he traveled to San Francisco for a vacation and was in the great earthquake in San Francisco. And he had heart problems. And so he made it back to Detroit, but died shortly after. So he had this really big life. And I'll show you this picture of my grandfather.
Mm.
So this was his grandson.
Oh, yeah.
That was my grandfather. And he, though he was wealthy and all of that, he was a conscientious objector in World War I. And he had worked with the YMCA prisoners in the YMCA. He'd gone to England and worked with prisoners of war. And he knew that they were just human beings. And so he became very vocal, and he was imprisoned. And he actually ended up on Alcatraz Island because he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison or be executed. But and he actually loved it there, and he assisted a surgeon, and he was thinking about being a surgeon, but he didn't. Instead, he went to China, and then he came back, and he started a cooperative farm because he liked how the Chinese did things, and the cooperative farm got people through the Depression, but he really didn't like our economic system at all. And so he's a banker during the day, and then sometimes people would get sick, and so he would put his overalls on and he would deliver the milk and the eggs, and you could get everything. You could get milk, eggs, chickens, they canned peaches and all of that, and you could order it, and then he would be the one delivering it, and his wife hated it. And then eventually the farm failed because people wanted to have their own land and stuff. But he was such a humble person and very, very religious. And he always was serving. He was a servant. He was a servant of people and a servant of God, and very spiritual. So he is my mentor, because my parents were very flawed, very, very, very flawed. And so he was like a superhero to me. So that's the story I have about my grandfather.
Chris, would you like to share his name?
Oh, his name was Harold Studley Gray.
And he was your grandfather from
my mom.
Mom's side. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Any specific? I see a lot of reflection of you.
Yeah. I mean, because my parents were struggling greatly, but my grandfather was a very good example to follow. Somebody who was successful, but who was spiritually committed to the oneness of mankind and to spirit. So anyway.
Thank you. I want to see those marshmallows made out of marshmallow root.
Yeah.
Maybe we can recreate them. Bauman Wellness marshmallows.
Yeah.
From the queen from the source.
Yeah. And then roast them over the fire.
We'll
right?
roast them on the fall equinox in Berkeley on our fire that Dion's going to bring for us. That'll be fun.
Dion, would you like to share anything?
Sure. I don't know which to talk about. Let's see if I can see that. That's better.
Oh boy, that's pretty.
That is my mother's mother,
Uh-huh.
my grandmother.
What's her name?
Her name was Patty Lillian Merritt Wood. And I was lucky enough to know her well. I was born when she was 42. I showed up on the scene during Mom's sophomore year of college, something like that. But there's a couple of stories about her that I think about a lot. Starting with that she was the sweetest, kindest, smartest woman I ever knew. But to me, she also was a person who, she was the first person that I recognized, insisted upon identifying herself the way she wanted to be identified and not letting the world label her a certain kind of way. She had many siblings, like I think 6, or she was the 6th, and her mother actually died giving birth to her, and her siblings blamed her for it her whole life. And so beginning at the age of 4, they would loan her out to other wealthy relatives as someone to scrub floors, do housekeeping, do their laundry, all by hand, of course. This was like 1930, I guess. And she was forced to like sleep on a mat on the floor as a child. So she worked really, really hard, and she always she really wanted to be a doctor. But back then it's like a nurse was really a clearer path for her. And during her entire childhood, she worked in the tobacco fields in Virginia. And when you pick tobacco, you put it in this bag that's long. It's like 15 or 20 feet long, and you just drag it behind you and fill it up. And she would then give the money to her brother, who put it in the bank for her. And so when she graduated from sort of a fancy high school, where my grandfather decided, they met when they were really young. My grandfather decided that the best way to make sure that she that she stayed his was to be smart enough to keep up with her in school and go to the same special high school and everything. And when she graduated, she asked her brother for the money, and her brother went to town to get the money and came back with a new car and a new wardrobe for himself. So he took the money that she had saved since she was by my thinking a baby, and spent it on himself as punishment to her. But she didn't let that stop her. She decided that she was going to go to Philadelphia, and that she was going to learn how to type. This was like the thing, she was going to learn how to type, and then she would make the money and she would be able to go to school. And unfortunately, that didn't work out either. But it did lead to solidifying the relationship between my grandparents, and the decision that they could support each other. My grandfather became the first Black bank teller in the state of Virginia. He was much trusted. And as a child, I remember going to the bank, and there would be 14 or 15 people in his line, and the other 4 tellers, there would be nobody in their line. And he explained to me that people knew that he wouldn't make fun of them for not being able to read or write, that he would always be honest, that he would never do anything wrong. And so they were like, it's totally worth waiting in the line for him. And that kind of speaks to one part of, how my grandparents were. But another great story of this completely sweet, angelic woman is that my grandfather told me that the one thing that she was really particular about was about people coming on their land without permission. And what he figured out was that he had to put the bullets for the shotgun in one end of the house and the shotgun in the other end of the house without telling my grandmother. So, because she was so fast to get the shotgun and point it at anybody who was on their farm, that and she would pull the trigger, and he knew it. It was he said that he needed that extra time for her that it would take her to get the bullets to put in the gun, you know, to be able to get in and tell her no, you know, get her to slow down a minute. She had zero tolerance for people coming on the land. But it was always hard for me to reconcile those two, you know, this person who had this really tough life, but was always helpful. She was a teacher. She, you know, rescued countless children from abusive homes, especially teens with disabilities who were being molested, things like that, making sure that kids who, you know, were poor, didn't have clothes, didn't have things to eat. She would very discreetly, you know, handle it in a way so that it didn't hurt their, you know, their pride. And I put this all to the fact that, as you saw from the picture, my grandmother was very fair-skinned, and so she could have passed, as they say. She could have asserted that she was white, and I think that her at least her adult life would have been a lot easier. But it is, in fact, the story of my grandparents' meeting that gets back to my original thought, which is that even at the ripe old age of 11, when she first encountered my grandfather, he was a dark-skinned Black child at that time, right? But he would tease her and say, "Why are you going to this school, white girl? This isn't a school for white girls." And it pissed her off because despite the fact of how she looked, she identified herself. You know, she recognized, like, she had brothers with green eyes and blue eyes and all of that stuff. And this is, of course, before we knew, you know, that all those traits come from Africa anyway. But you know, she knew and identified with African-American culture, with Black culture. And that's the way she identified herself. Even at 11, she knew that's who she was, that was a history that she understood and wanted to be attached to, that she would never try and pass for anything. She wanted to be who she was, regardless. And so once she caught on to the fact that my grandfather wasn't being mean, he knew that she would chase him and eventually tackle him. I can appreciate this. He was like probably 13, you know, and she was, you know, very like a glamorous and things like that a 13-year-old boy would say and do just about anything to get tackled by, you know, a beautiful girl. And they started a friendship and eventually married when they were 20. So, I mean, he was a little older, like 3 years older than her, but she was 20 and he was 23. But it was all built on these people knowing themselves, knowing who they were, you know, knowing they could have done things and made choices that would have made their life easier, but they wouldn't have been able to be who they knew they were in their heart. And I see that today with a lot of people who are biracial, who are, you know, trying to figure that out. My own stepchildren are Mexican and Black, and my nephews and niece are half white, half Black, and sometimes it's a struggle for them. You know, they don't know who they are. I actually think that the more kind of mixed up, mashed up that we are. Like, I am certainly a mutt. Like, I just found out I'm 25% Nigerian, and the next biggest chunk is 13% Scottish. So hello, cousin Christine. So, you know, and a whole bunch of other things from parts of the world. I have no idea how I got in there, you know, but, we all are lucky enough to be living in a time where we are not alone, like my grandmother was in the middle of nowhere, finding some sort of inner strength to say, no, this is who I am. So that's it.
Thank you for that beautiful story about and for bringing your grandparents into the space. Would anyone else like to share an ancestor story?
About my grandma, my mom's mom. She was the most kindest and patient person that I've ever known in a woman. And I think she's passed on those values to all of us in our generation too. So most of the cousins and everybody, my mom, I've seen a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance in them to deal with the things very calmly. And so I always think about her a lot. I think I was very, very attached. I'm the first grandchild in the family. So I was deeply, deeply attached with her. Even today, I can think of her if anything is going on, and it seems she's always there to give me direction. And the most spiritual person, it seems like, I know she was telling my mom one time that I feel she would wake up in the morning at 3:00, no matter what, and she would do her aarti, puja. She would be going to Gurdwara, and but she was an elevated soul. And that's the thing. I think I'm getting quite a bit from her, and I can definitely see my mom coming too. So,
Did you live with her? Did you live with her? Did she live
in my younger time in my childhood? Most of the time, we would always be there with her, and even after my marriage and all that stuff, I would go to her all the time. I was more close to her than even my mom. I could talk to her. I could kind of like pour out my feelings to her, and she would always be there to guide you through. So, and she would always say, like, if anything, you know what? In our culture, like in Punjabis, especially in the people who go to Gurdwaras, they always say Baba Ji is there. Baba Ji is the Vidhu, how do you explain that? I don't know. But he was the spiritual leader. So she would always say that Baba Ji is there. So don't worry. And that's how she was. And she would just always be smiling no matter what she went through. The worst of the things that she could go through, and she would be always smiling. We always saw her smiling. And she had a heart where she had a very big heart. Whoever came at home can never go without eating. As soon as somebody enters their house, it seems like she would just go and start cooking no matter what. And she had, I don't know, in India, we call barkat in her hands, that even if she made little, it would just be like plenty that people would never feel that they have not been fed. So very, very, like in an instant, she could cook, and the food just would be so delicious that you just want to go on eating. So,
Nita, would you share her name? And also, I'm curious, was your family, are they Sikh, part of the Sikh tradition?
No, they are not.
No, Hindu and Sikh.
Hindu, but so we are part from Amritsar in Punjab, in the northern India. So, in fact, I was born over there too, because at that time it was more kind of like the first delivery would happen in the mom's family. So my mom had gone to Amritsar for her delivery for me. And I had never been to Amritsar after that, but just before COVID hit, I went there because I wanted to go back to Golden Temple. And luckily, my daughter-in-law, she said, you know what, you're going, I want to come there too with you. So I said, okay. So we all, as a family, my son and my daughter-in-law, we all went to Golden Temple. And that was, I think, after I was born, that's the first time I went back to Amritsar. And I feel the connection. And I was thinking, I said, well, next time when I go, I want to take my mom back over there. So
What's her name again?
Shakuntala.
Shakuntala. Oh, that's my Nani's name also. My maternal grandmother was Shakuntala.
Oh, okay.
And the other grandmother is Banso Devi. Thank you. And the Golden Temple, if you have seen the pictures, it's just stunning. It's just extraordinary. Sikh temple in Amritsar, in Punjab, in northern India.
It just has that energy. And unfortunately, when we went, it was really, really cold and it was raining and pouring heavily. And as you're aware, like when you go in Golden Temple inside, you can't even wear socks, let alone shoes, but you can't even wear socks, and you have to cover your head before you go there. And they will not allow you to go into the temple without covering your head. And the only experience that I feel that I did not get because of all this situation that was going on there, I really wanted to experience, they make food for everyone that comes there. And it is called langar. And it's a very, very different type of experience, I've heard. And I really wanted to do that, but unfortunately I could not. So hopefully when I go next time, I think that's my one of the wishes, that I want to go back and do that experience a lot. I want to be able to go there for a little while. So I'll share. I'll see if I can find some pictures of it. So
I think, Chris, you just shared the Golden Temple image. That was beautiful. That was gorgeous.
Oh, was it Chris who? Chris
put it on the screen. Yeah.
Oh,
he's so smart, Chris. Thank you. I actually wanted to say something about the Sikh community, because we grew up as Hindus in northern India, but my dad is actually a very irreverent atheist, and my grandmother was too much sort of part of the cycles of nature to be religious, and but I've always had a deep respect for the Sikh community. We're often mistaken for Sikhs because of our last name. Because they're also a martial community like Anim, Singh. And but during COVID, one of the communities that has most come through in India, especially northern India, to help people is the Sikh community. And what they were doing was not just doing the langar, like feeding of people that Neeta spoke about, but they also did oxygen langars, because there was such a shortage during this massive COVID wave in India, which was really devastating for people, including my own family was barely got through it. We're very grateful they did. But they were giving oxygen to people, the Sikhs, and people would come like literally falling. They'd come on rickshaws and cars and cycles and barely, alive, and they would just be given oxygen in the temple. Kind of like a big communal scene there. So
let me share this. This is the picture of the Golden Temple that we had gone to. You can see at the back. So my daughter-in-law, she said that she wanted to experience both the morning time and the night time. And that's the reason why we went early in the morning, like around 5 a.m. so that we could get all the lighting and all that stuff too. And because we had very limited time to be there. But it was just a beautiful experience.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And anyone else? We just have time for, yes. Ed.
I seem to have a gender balancing role. And 10-to-1 is kind of my normal kind of ratio. So, I got to share a little bit about my grandfathers and so forth. And in thinking about this thing is that, I'm Jewish from birth and ancestry. And being Jewish, we're a tribe. And what we're talking about here is really tribe, old school. And what Bauman Wellness is, it's a new tribe. And it's the kind of tribe that welcomes kindred spirits from every place, all this stuff. I love it. I just love hearing, this real deep rooted, authenticity. So my grandpa on my dad's side, he was a little short guy with Dumbo ears. He had the biggest ears you could ever imagine. And he came over from Vienna, Austria. His name was Sam Bauman. And, Sam brought Anna, who was his bride in 1906. So, it was before World War I, and he went to Washington, D.C. So my whole family is from Washington, D.C. And Sam brought his brothers, his sisters, his cousin. Yeah, he brought everybody over. And he made sure everybody was taken care of. And he was a humble guy. He had a tailor shop, and it was almost like a Goodwill. he had like, coats and furniture and just really regular stuff. But he was just so old school Jewish Orthodox. And the religion was what, has kept Jewish people alive. And our covenant with Creator is that if we follow the teachings, we will be saved and guided and protected. But being Jewish, it's not a national thing. It's this tribal thing because we were kicked out of, our roots. And Sam was a hardworking guy. And then my dad said, I want to become an engineer. He said, Paul, Jews don't get into engineering school. You're Jewish. Get the idea you're Jewish in a Goyim Gentile world. And they don't want us, they don't need us, but we are smart and we hold together and we do fine. He said, be a doctor. Jews are doctors. So my dad went to dental school and was a dentist and an orthodontist. And he met my mom, and my mom was like the sweetest, wonderfulest woman. And my dad respected my mom. So like most stories women say is the men were mean and, just no respect. But because my mom was kind of a wonderful, smart person, and she worked for Franklin Delano Roosevelt, she was an economist. So, really cool. And my dad's side of the family, which was that grandfather, was very industrious. And my mom's side of the party liked to socialize, entertain, and drink. So my grandpa on my mom's side was like the coolest guy. His name was Adlai Mann, and he looked like Clark Gable. Guy was wicked handsome, and he could play the piano and sing and entertain. So we always had parties. But my dad said, don't be like your mom's side. They have like way too much fun, and they don't make money. And we got to have enough money. And I was, kind of in between. But I think, again, this thing about not belonging to the mainstream, I've never, had any relationship to normal mainstream life, and I've never wanted to, and I never tried to, and I never needed to. I had a religious orientation, and both my grandpa, Sam, on the hardworking side, and my dad, they were Grand Masons. So they had these rings that were super cool with the G in them and the diamond. And I go, man, these guys are a powerhouse. And they could wear some kind of big hat, and they'd go in the building, and I don't know what they did. I to this day, I don't know what they did. But there was kind of a spiritual leadership quality from the men, and also a sense of taking care of people and taking care of the family and taking care of the community and all that. And when my dad was about to die, he said, son, when you die, the only thing that lasts is your good name and your good works. And he said it in Hebrew. So whenever you hear stuff in Hebrew, it's like 10 times cooler than English, and unfortunately I didn't learn Yiddish and I didn't learn Hebrew, which is too bad because it's such a rich language. But I reflect upon them, and there are some men who are okay. And that's what we're trying to bring back, is a renaissance of men being, kind and supportive, and giving women, all the love and space and leadership that they deserve. So that's kind of why I'm here in this group of wonderful women.
Thank you, Ed.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say that actually both my grandfathers were super sweet and loving. And I know we're a little short of time. I'd love for anyone else to share, or even if anyone wants to reflect on how you feel when you share these stories, or what do you connect to within yourself, or how does it feel in your body? If anyone wants to share that, like somatically how you feel, because I could look at people and see how they were actually uplifted. Specifically, for example, Neeta, I'm thinking of you, and you talked about your grandmother and what an elevated soul she was. And I heard that from you, Ed, too, and from Chris, and also from Dion, and just that sense of being elevated, and for me personally, I usually burst out laughing when I think of my grandmother, because she was so funny and irreverent and liked to outwit people, Does anyone have a quick reflection on that? Just a somatic response to what the story does. Perhaps someone who hasn't spoken, or Alonia, maybe. I don't know who else is listening in.
Well, I could just say something.
Sure. Go ahead, Liz.
It's just really very moving to me, because, I think when you hear about people's grandparents, they just become so embodied, and you see that they are, you see the depths of their being, you see the intergenerational being, and how it's alive, for everybody it's alive, We've all had, even if you didn't know your grandparents or whatever, you have these beings and learnings and things that we hold on to as like precious, like the gems growing up, like the grandmother who was always smiling, and she was always kind no matter what. And, like all of this great stuff, like there's so many things like that everybody shared, So I just think that this is, these are all, they're alive in us. They're, even scientifically, they're alive, because you look at your DNA, you're getting it from your, you're getting not, sorry, just a second here. Sorry. You're getting it from your grandparents, So yeah, it's just really, I feel like I should talk about myself. Like, I sometimes just flatten my existence, and I'm just trying to push through and just trying to do what my day is about, or whatever the hell it's about. And it's just always any kind of recollection and reminder of all of these, all of us, not just myself, that my strengths and my history and what I've had and have and carry with me, but just that we're all like that. It's a very different viewpoint, I think, on the world, But just, yeah, thank you. Really appreciate everybody's stories, all the little everything, So thank you.
I do want to thank each one of you, even those who haven't spoken for just holding the vision of an ancestor, and whether you name them or not, but to bring yourself and their presence into the space. So, I really want to thank all of our ancestors for their gifts, even if they had really challenging lives and they lived in challenging times. Just the gift of resilience and the gift of wit. And I heard the gift of being unstoppable, the gift of being true to their heritage, of choosing not to pass, the gift of spirit. And one thing that I like to think of sometimes is, we all have our rituals, but just of a gesture that reminds you of your grandparents, and just to sort of honor our grandparents. And for me, that gesture is, and you're welcome to do your own gesture, and please feel free to share a gesture. But what I like to do is do what our grandparents always just stroked our head like this. And they blessed us. And every time they saw us, and this was habit, they were like, "Jeete raho beta, may you live long, my child, blessings." And there was just this particular sort of hand on the head or this caressing gesture that I've honestly never experienced through anyone else, And so I just long for that gesture, when we'd sit on their bed and they just keep doing that, keep stroking our heads like this, just like we were like little cats or something, because we felt the blessing seeping into us. One thing I wanted to add is, with Bauman Wellness and, nourishing communities of wellness that are taking us through times of COVID and climate change and climate justice and social, economic and racial inequities, and connecting the dots. That I'd love to share, also hear of recipes, maybe in another session, ancestor recipes, and maybe we can make the marshmallow. And I'd love to make the saag, the greens that my grandmother, the winter food that was cooked all day long in the village. And that's like a superfood. And so if anyone wants to share food recipes another time or do it live, hopefully that would be really lovely. Yeah. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, namaste.
With that, Ed, do you think we should conclude the session?
I think we're good. I think we're very good. And
You're muted.
Appreciate, thank you, Vidhu.
Yes.
And friends and family and tribe. And so let's keep reflecting and sharing. And when we're with people, ask them to share their stories with us, because it calls up a depth that we miss with the, busyness of life.
Thank you very much. That was good.
Blessings to you well.
Really good.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Take care, be well.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you.